Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if, Naruto Saves Mikoto from Itachi, part 2. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. The apartment was silent for a long moment before there was a shuffle of bed quilts from the small bedroom. Naruto sat up in bed, rubbed his eyes, and looked around the room, knowing that she had gone home for the night, but hoping that she was still there. He sighed, as he rotated in bed, putting his bare feet onto the cold wood, and shivering before standing up. Nature was a really annoying thing, but when it called you had better answer. He walked out into the main room of his small apartment, given to him by the Hokage barely a year prior, and walked a well-worn route to the toilet. He looked over at the door, noticing the key on the mat, as well as a small piece of neatly folded paper, probably a little note reminding him that the leftovers of tonight's dinner were in the fridge for him, probably for breakfast tomorrow before he left for the academy. Don't forget breakfast, it's the most important meal of the day. He smiled at the memory, as he walked into the toilet, humming a well-known tune, as he relieved himself before moving to the sink to wash his hands. Keeping clean was another important thing, apparently, or so Aunt Makoto told him with a serious face. When she had such a serious expression, he learned pretty fast to take whatever she said to heart. He walked back out into the main room, looked over at the key and note on the mat, sighed, and walked over to pick them up. He left the spare key on the small table in the middle of the main room, before opening the small folded letter, and reading it. It was one of her usual notes. Naruto, leftover beef is in the fridge, and I left a cup of that ramen you love in the microwave. It's all set up, so just push the button when you wake up tomorrow. Remember, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I should be back in 2 days, so make sure that you keep yourself fat or I'll box your ears. Aunt Makoto. He grinned at the signature at the bottom. He had been calling her aunt for the last few weeks, and she finally got used to it. She was a cool lady, made sure that he was living properly, cooked for him, talked to him, smiled at him, talked to him like he was an actual person, and never ignored him like so many people did. She treated him like a person, and he loved her for it. He was about to go to bed when he saw it, sitting beside the worn sofa. It was his aunt's umbrella. She must have left it behind when she left for the night. He walked over to it, and picked it up, thinking for a moment before grinning broadly. I guess I can do something nice for her this time, he said, as he set it down, and rushed to get changed. I better get this back to her. He blushed at you. Makoto laughed, as she remembered, looking up at the sky. Yeah, I told him I would be bringing Sasuke over next time, and he looked right at me, and blushed. I think he likes you, Makoto-san. Kakashi teased. That's not it. She shook her head before looking forward, noticing that her clan's compound was straight ahead. He's let down his walls when I'm around, but now it's another form of defense. What might that be? He's afraid that he might say something that would offend me, and push me away, she replied with a shake of her head. He's afraid of being left alone again, and doesn't know me enough yet to know how to talk to me. I see. Kakashi nodded his head before looking down at the worn gravel path. He's afraid of being left alone. That's it in a nutshell, Makoto answered with a sigh. He's a child who takes every bit of happiness in his life, and savors it, because it doesn't come to him every day. I want to change that. What are you planning? Kakashi asked with a raised brow. If he and Sasuke get along, Makoto said, before going silent for an uncertain moment. I have been thinking about taking him in. Adopting him. Yes, that will be difficult. Kakashi looked at her sideways. Your husband and the whole council don't want anything to do with the boy. They don't want to outright kill him, but I remember that meeting after the attack, and they were among the supporters to make him into a human weapon. Makoto sighed, and nodded. As much as I hate to admit it, what you've said isn't half wrong. And you still want to try. Yes, she replied without hesitation. Time changes people, and my husband doesn't hate him. I think that if I can talk to him I can convince him. Has he had that much of an effect on you? The copy nin asked dryly. He needs a family, Kakashi, she replied, giving him a look. You and the old man can only protect him so much from the shadows. A child needs more than that in order to survive in this world. The last thing I want for him is to be made into a human weapon, or become someone who has seen nothing of kindness, and hates the world because of it. I get where you're coming from, the copy nin conceded, closing his eyes, as he walked. But the resistance won't just be from your clan. There are other forces at work who want the boy, and what he possesses for their own goals. Plus, with the arguments taking place between the village and the Uchiha, many will think that your clan will be trying to gain a trump card. The rumors of our supposed coup, you mean? Makoto frowned. Don't tell me you believe that. Rumors are tricky things, Kakashi replied, looking over at her. And there are the movements within your own clan, all of these clan meetings, and such, and all of the secrecy. There have been disagreements since the Kyuubi massacre, I will not deny it. Makoto allowed. But you're looking in the wrong place, Kakashi. Sarutobi made it clear that he believed we had nothing to do with the attack. Why would we turn against someone who was actually trying to help us? Then what about those meetings? She sighed, massaging her temple with her hand before speaking. The meetings were to debate about reconciliation between us and the village. That last meeting was for a clan vote on ripping down the compound walls and reintegrating, which was passed with a majority vote. So it wasn't to plan a coup. No Kakashi, she sounded angry now. It was for reconciliation, to show the leaf that we weren't out to get them. Kakashi looked at her, wide-eyed for a moment before lowering his head and sighing. It would have helped if you would have just said it. My husband wanted to keep it a surprise, Makoto groaned, as she looked up in time to see the main gates of the clan compound. He may not be rebellious, but he does have a flair for the theatrical, and wanted to see the surprise on the Hokage's face, as he told him. Well, that is a relief, Kakashi muttered, rubbing his face as he spoke. I'll have to tell the Hokage that, maybe he can pretend a surprised face when Fugaku-san comes in, and tell him. She wanted to laugh, but just before they got to the entrance to the clan gate she stopped, ears listening for any sound beyond the walls. It may be late at night, but there still should have been noise, shops closing, and people walking and talking. There should have been some sound or some flicker of light. There was nothing. It was silent. Ominous silence. She ran. Before Kakashi could even attempt to stop her, she had reached the gate and looked inside. What she saw would remain in her memories until her dying breath. The clan compound, which had housed the Uchiha clan for half a decade, was eerily silent, and the inside looked more out of something from a nightmare than from reality. The main street was littered with bodies, unmoving and bloodied. Male, female, elderly, and children littered the road, blood streaming from deadly wounds and flowing towards the drainage system. Makoto took a shaky step back, eyes wide, wanting to scream, but grasping her hands over her mouth to stop herself from doing so. There wasn't a millimeter of movement from the bodies within the compound. They were dead. They were all dead. Makoto-san, Kakashi called, as he finally caught up to her, looking at her for a moment before turning his attention to the source of her distress. His one visible eye widened in surprise and disbelief before narrowing, as he fell back upon a decade and a half of shinobi training. Milady, we will back away slowly and stay behind me. Do not leave my side for any reason, do you understand? Makoto could do nothing more than nod, as she looked upon the massacre before her. Kakashi nodded before biting his right index finger, coating his fingertips in his blood, before making the 5 necessary hand seals for the summoning, and slamming his bloodied right hand onto the concrete floor. He muttered the words Kuchius no Jutsu. There was a blast of smoke, and when it cleared, a single dog sat before them. Send word to the Hokage to send as many Anbu down here as humanly possible. The Uchiha clan has been attacked. The dog nodded before taking off, running with speed down the street, before using a chakra-enhanced jump to elevate him to the roof of one of the 2-story buildings, before vanishing from sight. We should wait for reinforcements. I'm going, Makoto cut him off, as she took a step forward. Kakashi moved swiftly, grabbing her arm before she could move out of his reach, and turning her around to face him. Makoto-san, it is too dangerous. There might be survivors out there somewhere, she replied, looking panicked, but doing a good job in keeping herself calm. And if there are, then they will need help. He looked into her eyes, seeing a lot of fear, but also a lot of resolve and stubbornness to see this through. Their eyes locked for the longest time before the copying inside and let her go. Wherever you go, I go, lead the way. She looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing his honesty, before nodding and beginning to walk. The first step is to check on the main members of the clan. So to the central house first? Kakashi asked. Yes, to the central house first. Kakashi nodded before repeating his earlier statement, led the way. Makoto nodded her head and broke out into a run. Sasuke ran down the street, as fast as his legs could carry him, bringing up his left wrist to look at his watch. He grimaced slightly, at least 2 hours late. He had seriously overdone it this time. His mother would probably scold him for being so late. The young Uchiha increased his speed, running down the last few streets to his clan's compound, as fast as his legs could carry him. He rounded the last corner, and slammed headlong into the body. The sudden collision had thrown him off balance, and he landed roughly onto the ground, and skidded to a halt. Pain laced through him, but he fought it aside, and looked up to see who he had run into. It was a boy, around his age, with spiky blonde hair and tanned skin. He raised his head, face grimacing in shock and slight pain. He wore a pair of black slacks, and a white t-shirt with the symbol of the Leaf Village emblazoned on the front. The young Uchiha noticed whisker-like markings along his cheeks, and immediately recognized him. He was from his academy class, a loudmouth bratty kid. Watch where you're going, he growled, as he slowly got to his feet. Look who's talking, the blonde shot back, as he gritted his teeth, enduring the pain of a grazed knee, far better than anyone else his age. Don't run into me like that, moron. You ran into me, dead last, Sasuke growled back, watching, as the other boy's head snapped up at the insult, oceanic blue eyes narrowing in anger. Then they widened in recognition. Hey, you Sasuke, right? The young Uchiha wasn't surprised by the recognition. Every member of his class knew him before he even entered the classroom. He had wanted to make friends, but the girls rushed him the moment he entered, fawning over him, and making him feel really uncomfortable. Then the boys began ignoring him, and he did the same. No one in his class was worth his attention. They were either screaming fangirls or overly excitable boys who liked to get one over on each other. What's it to you? He asked with a growl. I know your mom. Really? Sasuke asked incredulously. Yeah, do you know where she is? He reached under him and pulled out an umbrella, or a parasol, white with the emblem of his clan emblazoned on the fabric. She left this behind, and I want to give it back to her. How did you get that? He asked, eyes narrowing. The blonde did not look the least bit afraid or perturbed, instead he answered. She's been helping me out the last month, and when she left this behind, I kinda thought I could start paying her back by giving this back to her. Sasuke frowned, but after a moment of thought he supposed it was true. That was an Uchiha parasol he was carrying, and all of them were signed by their owners to make sure that if they were lost, then they would be returned. He grabbed the boy's arm, ignoring his annoyed outbursts, and looked under the fabric of the parasol, noticing his mother's signature on the white fabric. You didn't steal this, did you? He asked. Now he looked even more annoyed. I am Naruto Uzumaki, future Hokage. I do not steal. Sasuke sighed and raised his hands in surrender. Alright, just give it to me, and I'll give it back to her. Naruto looked at him for a moment before scoffing. Nah, I'll give it back to her myself, don't want you taking all the credit. That annoyed Sasuke, but then the more he thought about it, the more annoyingly stupid it seemed. Why would I want to take credit for giving it back to her? I don't know, maybe because you're mama's boy. I'm not, Sasuke shot back, sounding incredibly offended. Mama's boy. Take it back. As if I would. I'll rip you to pieces dead last. Try it with duck hair. The two of them had fallen into basic fighting stances, though Naruto's seemed a little off balance, and he was carrying the parasol, as if it were a club. They were like that for a moment, and before either of them could reply an explosion resounded throughout the street and beyond. Startled and frightened by the noise, both boys flinched before looking in the direction where the sound came from. A billow of smoke was rising from the ground several meters away to their right, and the young Uchiha's eyes widened in fear. That came from home. He muttered the words fearfully before his eyes widened in shock and horror. My clan. He took off, arguing with Naruto, forgotten, as he sped towards the entrance to his clan's compound. Naruto remained behind for a moment, holding the parasol in his hands, staring at the rising smoke in wide-eyed surprise and horror before he remembered Sasuke's words. 2 words left his mouth then. And Makoto. He took off, chasing after Sasuke, as fast as his legs could carry him. Itachi, her oldest son, stood in the middle of the storage room, katana drawn, eyes dead and lifeless, and the unmoving form of Fugaku lying at his feet, blood pooling around him. There was far too much blood for him to be still alive. She took a step back, gasping in surprise and disbelief as her eldest son's eyes fell upon her. There were eyes which held no emotion nor any hindrance, eyes of a shinobi, eyes of a killer. A lump formed in her throat, but she was still able to get her words through, fighting against the rising bile and shock. Itachi, why? I'm sorry, mother, he replied, wiping his blade to the side to dispel the blood covering it before falling into a sword-fighting stance, one for a quick and deadly draw. But I must kill you too. He surged forward with remarkable speed, so much speed that Makoto was unable to even lift a hand to protect, let alone fight. His blade soared forward, aimed for her heart. A body blurred in front of her, and steel scrapped against steel, as a kunai intercepted her eldest son's katana. Itachi put his weight into the blade for a moment before jumping back and falling into a combat stance. Kakashi-senpai. Kakashi stood between her and Itachi, kunai in hand, and although she couldn't see it, she knew that he had lifted his headband, showing her son his Sharingan eye. He spoke with authority which showed his tank as a commander of the Anbu Black Ops. Stand down, Itachi. Itachi raised his blade and fell back into a charging stance. I cannot, my orders are clear. Orders from whom? Kakashi asked, standing between the Uchiha matriarch and her eldest son, a protective barrier. I cannot say, Itachi replied without emotion. You better say. I am your superior, Itachi. My orders come from a higher authority, Itachi replied without emotion. Really now, Kakashi shot back. I am a commander in the Anbu. There are only 2 people above me in rank. The Chunin commander and the Hokage himself, neither gave such an order. It was Black Ops. We are Black Ops, and missions only come down from the Hokage to the commanders. Kakashi replied, eyes simmering. Were you briefed by a commander? Did you know him or see his identification? Itachi sighed before looking up at both Kakashi, ready for battle with him, and his surprised mother. Alright, I knew the orders were wrong. Then why did you proceed? Simple really, Itachi replied with a small ominous smile. I wanted to test myself. Test yourself? Makoto asked in shock and disbelief. You murdered men, women, children, the elderly, the infant, the entire clan just to test yourself. Yes, he replied without emotion, before placing his hands together into an unfamiliar seal. Itachi, Makoto almost sobbed. What has happened to you? I am how you and father made me, mother. Itachi replied, as he opened his eyes to reveal a 3-tomo Sharingan. And now I will show you what I have become. I will not allow it, Kakashi interrupted, as he placed his hand together, preparing to unleash a jutsu. You have no choice. I am now beyond any shinobi Konoha possesses. Not even the Hokage himself can stand against me now. He closed his eyes. You have become quite cocky, Itachi, Kakashi replied, as he finished his seals. Not at all, the sign of the Uchiha replied, as he opened his eyes, showing that his Sharingan eyes had morphed into something else. The pupils had morphed into three-blade shuriken-like shapes, rotating at blurring speed. I have simply seen the truth, and now I will further test my abilities against you, Sharingan Kakashi. Try me, Kakashi replied before inhaling a mass of air before exhaling, calling out the name of his jutsu, as he did so. Katen. Kankakuk no Jutsu. A stream of flame spewed from his mouth, morphing into a fireball mid-flight, on a collision course with the young Anbu. Itachi simply looked at the ball of flames with his eyes, almost, as if they were nothing more than a small hindrance before uttering three words which changed the course of the battle inevitably in his favor. It was all inevitable. Manjukam Sharingan, Amaterasu. Doten. Dorikeki. The two boys rushed down the street, trying desperately to ignore the mass of dead bodies which littered their path. For Naruto it was traumatic. He had never seen a dead body before, let alone the mass which lay before and behind him. For Sasuke it was even more traumatic. These dead corpses were all people he knew and loved, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and friends, all dead. He had to close his eyes, attempting to stop the tears from spilling down his cheeks. Something grabbed onto his ankle, and he went down into a heap, Naruto racing a few steps ahead of him, before he noticed that the Uchiha had fallen, and turned around to see what had happened. Sasuke opened his eyes, and slowly turned around. He hadn't tripped over something had grabbed onto him. The first thing he saw was a pale hand covered in splatters of blood, holding onto his ankle. Sasuke gasped, as still as a stone statue. Naruto grabbed his wrist before he could draw kunai, and just as the young Uchiha was able to throw a frantic look his way, the young blood narrowed his eyes, and motioned back towards the hand. Sasuke looked, and his eyes widened at who he saw. It was one of his fellow clansmen who had stopped him. She couldn't have been any more than a year older than him. Her hair was shoulder length, and as black as night, like all Uchiha hair. Her eyes were onyx-colored, skin as pale as snow. Her eyes were dull, but just had enough strength in them to force herself to move. Sasuke immediately tried to remember any of his cousins with that hairstyle, but it was difficult. She was covered in her own blood, spatters on her face, and seeping into her clothes. She could have been Hitomi, but she had longer hair, Midori maybe, or Miki or Ryoko. He couldn't think. Help, she rasped through a hoarse, weak, dry voice, pleading, desperate. Help me, Sasuke, please. Naruto was by his side, gently disengaging her grip around his ankle, and rolling her onto her back, in time to see the gruesome slash wound which had cut open her stomach. Blood flowed from the wound in a continuous waterfall of crimson, and Sasuke had to do everything in his power to stop himself from throwing up. Go on ahead, Naruto said to him. I've got this. Sasuke hesitated, and his hesitation led him to see the blonde-haired boy's right hand, encompassed in flickering flames of the deepest crimson, held over the dying girl, his left hand supporting her, as he looked down upon her with uncertain eyes. What is that? He asked fearfully, pointing at the crimson flames. Naruto looked at his hand for a moment before looking back at Sasuke, eyes looking a hair's breadth away from vindication and horror. I don't know, but I figure this will either save her or end her suffering. It hurts. Both boys looked down to see the pain grimace of the young woman, tears streaming down her cheeks, as she silently cried. It hurts, please help. I'll help, Naruto soothed softly to the girl before looking back at Sasuke. Your mom still needs you. Go. How do you know she's still alive? Sasuke asked, looking down at his fellow clanswoman with something akin to a loss of faith. Don't ask me how, Naruto replied, his voice almost like a man with 3 times as many years of life. I just do. Sasuke looked between this blonde-haired boy he had just noticed, and his cousin, dying, and crying softly, in his arms. He was silent for a moment before violently shaking his head, and standing up. If she dies, Naruto cut him off with a melancholy smile, then you can kill me yourself. Sasuke looked right into Naruto's eyes before nodding his head, and taking off in the direction of the main house, leaving Naruto and the dying girl behind. Naruto looked down at the crying girl, then at his outstretched hand. Please let this work. He raised his hand over her wound, and brought it down. The main house was in sight now, and Sasuke kept running without hesitation down the bloodied streets, ignoring the bodies which still littered the ground. They seemed to stretch on forever, and they might as well. That didn't matter now. All that mattered was him getting to the main house to see if his family was alright. He had just rushed up to the main door, hand outreached to pull it aside when he heard another explosion, one which shook the ground he walked on. The young boy's hand remained where it was, barely a centimeter away from the front door. That explosion had been very close as his home's backyard. Panic threatened to consume him, his body screaming at him to run away, as far, and as fast, as he could. But his mind forced it down with memories of his mother, and father, and his older brother. So with a gritting of teeth he forced the door open, and ran inside, not even stalling enough to remove his shoes, as he ran to the backyard. The explosion had come from the storage shed, the entire frontal section blown open. Scattered fires blazed around the structure, and on the ground, eating away anything in their path. But the flames were wrong. Fire was supposed to be a mixture of flickering reds, oranges, and yellows. This fire was as black as night, and it burned with the intensity of an inferno. Then Sasuke saw the bodies, 2 of them. One was a ninja, a shinobi he didn't recognize, lying on his front, hands outstretched and unmoving. His nin vest and fatigues were signed by the blast, but besides that the boy couldn't see much else. He then looked further, and his eyes widened in horror. His mother lay on her back in the middle of the yard, one arm on her stomach, while the other was outstretched, head lolled to the side, mouth slightly open, and eyes closed. She didn't move an inch, even, as Sasuke rushed to her side, grabbed her shoulders, and shook her. "Mom," he called, tears rushing down his cheeks, as his female parental figure remained unmoving even, as he screamed at her to move. "Mom, wake up, Mom." "Hello, Sasuke." His eyes widened in surprise and shock as he heard the familiar voice of his brother, and he turned around to see Itachi standing over them both, dressed in his Anbu armor and matching gray fatigues. A katana was held idly at his side, dripping with blood onto the ground. "Big brother," Sasuke murmured, eyes looking at the bloodied sword before focusing back onto his onyx eyes, which somehow seemed wrong. They just seemed so wrong. "What's going on? What happened here? Mom's been hurt, and where's Dad?" Before he could continue his stuttering, he heard a whistle of something slicing through the air, followed by pain to his left cheek. He lifted his left hand up, placed his fingers onto his cheek, and brought it back to sight to see the red liquid coating his fingers. Blood, it was his blood. His now dilated pupils focused on the stone wall behind him to see kunai embedded in the wall, right in the middle of the red and white fan of his clan. He looked back at his brother with a new expression on his face, from bewilderment and shock to fear and dread. Itachi began to speak, but his words seemed dead and lifeless, as if he were rehearsing a play. "Foolish little brother." "Itachi," Sasuke mouthed, taking a step back. "Manjukam Sharingan," Itachi muttered with a flat finality, eyes opening to see a Sharingan Sasuke had never seen before, one which seemed to bleed malice and ruthlessness in its gaze. "Tsukiyomi." Sasuke was caught by those eyes, and suddenly found himself pulled into something. He knew by instinct that it was a jinjutsu, but it was a jinjutsu way beyond the basic ones they taught in the academy. It seemed that time was reversing, and then the nightmare began. Shown in blacks, whites, and grays with muted and echoing voices, Sasuke was forced to watch as his elder brother decimated their clan. He was forced to watch as his cousins, aunts, and uncles charged him after he killed the first few, only to be cut down before they even knew what hit them. Then he was no longer in the streets of his clan's compound. He was in the storage shed of his own house, watching as his father sat on his knees, regal and strong, as Itachi stood over him with a katana in hand. He brought the ninja 2 over his head before bringing it down, slashing it across his father's back, blood splattering the walls from the strike. Sasuke's eyes were wide, pupils dilated. He wanted to scream for his brother to stop, but found himself unable to, looking down at the unmoving body of his father. The scene changed again, ever so slightly, showing his mother and the unknown shinobi enter the room. There were words exchanged. He saw his mother weeping, and he saw the hardening gaze of the Chunin as he interrogated Itachi. Then it happened. Black flames seemed to envelope his older brother, before flashing out to strike at his mother. The shinobi reacted swiftly, erecting a wall of rock and dirt between them. It took the brunt, but was unable to take it all. Sasuke watched as the wall shattered, his mother and the shinobi thrown back by the impact, slamming through the rice paper sliding doors, and skidding across their backyard before coming to a halt. "Stop it," he murmured in a fearful voice, unable to do anything more than look straight ahead. "I neither have the time nor the patience to deal with you." Being gone from my sight, his elder brother spoke to him, as if he was worthless, not even worth the time to scrape him off his sandals, and that lifeless, that deadness, which hurt Sasuke more than any blade. "Run, little brother, run until morning, and then run further." Itachi walked right past him, as if he were nothing, katana in hand, as he traversed the ground towards his target. Sasuke looked up in time to see him raise his katana over his mother's chest, ready to bring it down for a killing stroke. He didn't know how or why, but suddenly he moved, a kunai fell into his hand, and he threw it with all he had. Itachi was forced to turn and intercept the kunai with his ninja 2, watching it dully, as the knife ricocheted off his blade with a flash of sparks before looking over at Sasuke. His eyes widened for a moment, as if seeing something he didn't expect, before those dull dark eyes returned to their deadened state. "You cannot stop me, little brother." "But we can," an old, wizened voice called from beyond the yard. Both Uchiha looked up in time to see a half-dozen figures standing on the stone walls of the compound, silhouettes dark and malicious in the low lamplight. Sasuke knew though. He could see it, and he had studied the textbooks enough to know who had just arrived. 5 of them were Anbu, fully dressed in their armor, masks over their faces, and hands on the hilts of their ninja 2. The most elite and vicious unit in Konoha's deadly shinobi arsenal was looking down at Itachi, one of their own, with a single purpose. Even with their faces concealed, Sasuke could feel it in the air and in his own chakra network. These men and women were willing and able to fight to the death. The 6th member, right in the center, was worse still, dressed in black fatigues with dull gray samurai-like light armor and helm, 2 black ribbons flowing in the wind. The Sandaime Hokage in that moment looked like both the angel of salvation and the harbinger of death. In the low light his face seemed to morph from that of an understanding grandfather to that of a hardened soldier, trained in the art of killing, and more than willing to use it. "Stand down, Itachi," the Hokage ordered. "You have spilled more than enough blood this night." "I thought you would have been pleased, Hokage-sama," Itachi said, as he looked up. "I'm not," Sarutobi replied. "Drop your weapon, or die." "I chose neither," Itachi replied. There was an explosion of white smoke, encompassing the entire courtyard, but for some reason Sasuke could still see. He watched, as his elder brother moved swiftly, bringing his ninjutsu once again over his mother's chest. Sasuke moved faster than he ever did. A trio of kunai fell into his right hand, and he threw them with speed and accuracy he didn't know he had. Two were intercepted by his older brother's ninjutsu. The other embedded itself into his brother's sword hand. But the flinch Itachi dropped his ninjutsu and looked at his brother for a long moment, good hand reaching up to grab the wrist of his now useless other hand, before bursting into a mass of black flames, vanishing into the night like a wraith. The smoke cleared, and the Anbu descended. Sasuke could just barely hear the Hokage barking orders to his subordinates, as he fell to his knees next to his mother's unmoving form. Squads 1 through 4 spread out, find him, and drag him back here dead or alive. Squad 5 take Makoto-san and Kakashi-san to the hospital. Squad 6 through 10 search the grounds for survivors. The mood of all within the Hokage's chamber was somber. The Hokage sat in his chair, hands steepled together, as he leaned against his table, looking down upon the thick mission report sent to him by the commander of his Anbu detail. He looked down upon it with tired, defeated eyes before looking up at the handful of men in the room, men and women he trusted, men and women who together represented the clans and council of Konoha. "Many of you have probably already heard the rumors," Sarutobi said, as he stood up, clasping his hands behind his back, as he turned to look out the huge window of his office. "The rumors, I'm afraid, are true. Last night the Uchiha clan was attacked and massacred by one of its own. There were no gasps, no sounds permeated the air. It was all eerily silent." Slowly the Hokage turned, gaze first meeting that of his two former teammates and eldest advisors. The eyes of Homura Mitakato were closed, and his head was bowed in somber reverence. The female member of his old team, Kaharu Udatane, breathed a heavy sigh, as she too looked down. The voice of Shikakunara cut through the silence, as he rubbed his forehead with his right hand. "How can one man wipe out an entire clan? Such power is indeed terrifying to think of," Shibi Aburum thought out loud, looking through the room, and each of his recipients. "I knew that Itachi Uchiha was a prodigy, but I still find it difficult to fathom that even he has the capability to wipe out an entire clan in a night. It is a serious blow to our military capability at least," Kaharu muttered, folding her arms, as the elderly woman spoke. "Not to mention that the military police has effectively ceased to exist." Hiashi Hyuga was silent for a moment, head bowed slightly, and eyes closed, as he thought. The Uchiha may have been the rivals and opponents of his clan, but they all descended from the same ilk, even though at this time both his people and the Uchiha saw each other with tension and suspicion. The Uchiha were still his clan's cousins. There would be mourning among the Hyuga in the coming months. "Do we know the location of Itachi Uchiha?" he asked at last, opening his eyes to look at the Hokage. "He escaped," Hiruzen replied with a sigh. "Killed at least 5 Anbu while he was at it, and injured a dozen others. The survivors reported being made the subject of unbreakable genjutsu and black flames, which most likely means that he has gained the power of the Mangekyo Sharingan." "That is indeed worrying," Hiashi murmured. "Those eyes are a curse, granting the wielder great power, but also slowly degrading his senses until nothing remains." The secrets of the ultimate Sharingan were not completely known by anyone outside of the clan. Even the Hokage himself, his top commanders, and the heads of the most powerful clans only knew so much about what the Mangekyo Sharingan was capable of, and the Uchiha was very secretive of their techniques, as was almost any major clan. Hiruzen nodded his head to Hiashi's statement. "What of the clan itself? Do we know of any survivors?" Inoichi Yamanaka asked. "Yes, at the moment there are only 3, Hiruzen replied with a sad bow of his head. "It might become 2 though." The clan head's youngest son, Sasuke Uchiha, was the only Uchiha to come out of it physically unscathed, though he has suffered mentally. The matriarch, Makoto, is in a stable condition, and the third survivor, Midori Uchiha, is currently undergoing surgery in intensive care. The doctors tell me that her chances of survival were 50-50 at best. "And Kakashi-san's condition?" Shukaku asked. "Also stable," Hiruzen added. The clan heads shook their heads, some in dismay over the loss of so much human life in their backyard, others for the weakening of their own military power. The loss of so many Uchiha was a bad blow for the village however you look at it. "He could not have done this alone," Tsu Minizuka growled. "Someone must have helped him do this." "I agree," Homura nodded his head. "Itachi was capable, yes, but I doubt even he could do all of this. Do we have any information on who may have aided him to commit this atrocity?" The Anbu commander who supposedly gave him these orders was found dead on the outskirts of the village in the early hours of the morning. The Hokage growled in supreme annoyance. "All evidence suggests that it was a clean and thorough assassination." There was nothing at the site which could lead our forensic teams to gain any clues. The site had been thoroughly sterilized. There is no evidence. Whoever did this was a pro, Shibi said thoughtfully. Indeed, my Anbu are still searching for clues, but we would be most grateful if the Inizuka, Apuram, and Hyuga could lend their talents. Hiruzen said, as he looked around. Yes, Hokage-sama, Tsum agreed with a bow. You will have our most seasoned trackers. Shibi said with a nod of his head. The eyes of the Hyuga will help any way we can. Hiashi finished for the trio. This was a notorious act, an unlawful slaughter in our own backyard, which cannot be allowed to go without an appropriate response. Thank you, all of you. Hiruzen started with a nod of his head. There will be uncertain times ahead, but I ask you all to remain strong and steadfast throughout. We have lost many brothers and sisters tonight, but they will never be forgotten, and those responsible for this horrendous act will be found and punished for this crime. All in attendance nodded in agreement. I will keep you all informed of any changes that may occur. The clan heads nodded their heads, knowing that the signal had been given to end the meeting. They filed out of the room, moving to implement their respective tasks. Only 3 people remained. The Hokage and his 2 former teammates and advisors were the only souls left once the door closed. Hiruzen sat heavily in his chair, as Homura and Koharu took their seats at the other end of the table. This is a disaster, Homura muttered at last. Sarutobi agreed with a nod. It will take the village a while to recover from this atrocity, Koharu added, allowing her stony facade to dissolve for a moment. Not just in military terms either. Many friends have been lost tonight. It feels like we're at war again. A few have survived, Sarutobi murmured. We should be grateful for that at least. That reminds me to ask, Sarutobi, Koharu rubbed her forehead for a moment. What was the Uzumaki boy doing in the compound? It is true that if he were not there then the number of survivors would have fallen to 2, however. Makoto had started looking after the boy, on and off, for the last month or so. Sarutobi explained. The night of the massacre she had been at his apartment cooking him a meal, and checking up on him. She left her parasol at his apartment, and the boy decided to return it to her. He happened upon the massacre by circumstance. I see, Homura nodded. Did you think he had something to do with it? Hiruzen asked tiredly. Of course not, Koharu shook her head. We are simply worried, is that all? The boy did indeed use the power of the Kyuubi this night, though it appeared to be unconsciously. Sarutobi stated, rubbing his head. If he wasn't there the number of survivors of the clan would have been 2 instead of 3. If he and Makoto hadn't met, it might have even been just 1. Do you think Itachi might try again? Koharu asked. If he does, we will be ready, Hiruzen replied with a voice of steel. I want all of the clans and shinobi in the village to be on high alert. The Anbu are to be fully recalled to service and scattered around the village accordingly, and I want a full detail to keep guard over the survivors around the clock until we are sure the danger has passed. Yes, Hokage-sama, Koharu and Homura replied, as one, bowing their heads in silent agreement. It will be done, as you will. Keep an eye on Danzo, as well, Hiruzen finished. I feel in my bones that he has had something to do with this. Yes, Hokage-sama. Dismissed, Hiruzen finished. Deep under the surface of Konohagakure's Old Town District, in the oldest sewer systems of the village, was the new temporary headquarters of the secretive branch of Anbu known as Root, and they were assembling in full force, gathering together in a drained-out chamber. Almost 50 elite ninja had gathered from every corner of the Hidden Leaf village, answering the call of their master. The leader in question sat on a tatami mat in the middle of the crevice, outwardly calm and collected. Dressed in a white high-collared robe, a rickety walking stick laid out to his left. The full right side of his body was covered in bandages, even across the right side of his face, obviously missing an eye, and sporting a stump which was once a right arm. It was obvious the man had been through war. Silence was constant. His soldiers, all kneeling with their heads bowed, did not make a single movement or gesture. They were as still as statues, waiting for his order. Each shinobi had been put through severe mental and physical conditioning, trained to operate at maximum efficiency with no emotion. They were the perfect soldiers. Danzo frowned. He did not like assembling his root like this, but the current situation with the Uchiha called for it. Itachi Uchiha was supposed to be his greatest intelligence asset, gathering information on his clan's alleged activities and their rumored coup d'etat against the village. If necessary, he would have ordered him to strike at the heart of the clan, annihilating the clan council, and their leader was the best he expected Itachi to be capable of. He did not anticipate even Itachi to be capable of annihilating the entire clan, and even then Danzo would have sent at least half of his organization's number to make sure the mission was a complete success. Now he sat here, waiting for news of the massacre. There were rumors of survivors within the clan, and if so then there was potential for him to not only gain the power he was seeking, but also the potential to build a new loyal Uchiha clan from the ashes of the old. He heard movement in the rafters above, and watched as an Anbu fell silently from above. The elder, not even batting an eyelash, as he fell into a kneeling stance, had bowed in silent reverence. Danzo eyed the plain white poor mask, and immediately knew him as the operative he had implanted in Sarutobi's Anbu ranks. "Report," the Cyclops ordered lightly. The man nodded his head. We were finally able to gain the intelligence you desired, Danzo-sama. Out of the 229 living members of the Uchiha clan, Itachi killed all but 3, the matriarch of the clan, Makoto Uchiha, as well as her youngest son Sasuke, and one of her nieces, Midori. Makoto-san has been hospitalized with a number of injuries, but is currently stable. Sasuke-san is physically unharmed. However, the niece, Midori-san's chances of survival at the moment is 50-50, suffering from a stab wound to her stomach, massive internal bleeding, and trauma. So there are 3 survivors, but the number could fall to 2. Danzo murmured, massaging his chin with his one remaining hand. And the Uzumaki boy, what was his role in all of this? According to reports, it appears that the Uzumaki boy was there by coincidence, the operative reported. We have learned that the matriarch has taken an interest in the boy, and has been observed aiding the boy in day-to-day living. He was returning a parasol she had left behind. He stumbled upon the Uchiha boy, and together the 2 of them came upon the massacre. The only reason Midori-san is still alive is because he tapped into the powers of his tenant to keep her alive. He tapped into the Kaibi's power. Danzo questioned, about to take a sip of his tea, but hesitated upon hearing the news. It would appear so, the agent acknowledged with a nod. However, it seems that he was somehow able to use his power to heal instead of destroy. Now that is interesting. Danzo thought out loud, as he took a long sip of his tea, draining the last of its contents, before laying it on the smaller mat beside him. What is Sarutobi's response to this? Tripling security around the village, the hospital has at least 6 Anbu units guarding it around the clock, and the Uzumaki boy's own detail has doubled. The Hokage is keeping the massacre from becoming public knowledge for as long as possible, but the other clans, as well as the elders, have recently been informed as to what has happened. I see, Danzo murmured, remaining silent for a long moment before looking up to his subordinate. Good work, continue to monitor the situation, and report any changes to me. The agent bowed, then like a wraith jumped up to the rafters once again with short bursts of chakra to his feet. All the while his leader was in quiet contemplation. He needed to make preparations, tie up loose ends, and remove anything which would incriminate him in what had happened. All documentation linking him and his organization to Itachi was to be burned. All agents who had made contact with the Uchiha were to be eliminated. With a wave of his hand he dismissed all but 5 rude operatives, sending them back to their positions within the village. These 5 operatives, whom he trusted the most, were to be given his orders, and would be responsible for making sure that the orders were carried out efficiently and effectively. He would remove all evidence to his association with Itachi, and through that Konoha's last line of defense would survive. He would do what was best for Konoha, even if it perceived him and his troops as villains. That was what he and his root were. The silent guardians and shadow operatives of the superpower which was the village hidden in the leaves. They would protect the village, even if doing so meant using methods that Sarutobi and his soft-minded followers frowned upon. That was the reason for their existence. That was root. Makoto lay in bed, body covered in white bandages from various wounds, as she looked out the open window of her private hospital room, feeling the gentle blow of a cool breeze and the rustling of noises outside of her window. It almost seemed like a dream that she would soon wake up from. Makoto had hoped for the longest time that all of this was just a dream, in which she would wake up to see her husband beside her, getting up and preparing breakfast for her 2 sons. She had hoped that all she had witnessed was nothing but a dream. How cruel life was. She knew, deep down, that what had happened was not a dream. The images of her clan, her brothers and sisters, her nieces and nephews, her cousins, aunties, and uncles strewn across the ground, blood flowing to darken the ground with its taint. Those images would never leave her until her dying days. What was worse was the cold, hard knowledge that the perpetrator of this horrific crime was her own son, her eldest son. The scion of the entire clan had become its downfall overnight. He had not only killed his clan, but took the life of his father, and tried to take her life as well. A tear silently fell along the circumference of her cheek. How bad a mother had she been for her eldest son to become this? How much of a failure had she been not to see the signs of what he was about to do, and try to stop it? Makoto looked out the window, a heaviness descending on her breast, a heaviness of guilt and uselessness. Her eldest son had killed their entire clan, probably taking the life of her husband, and her youngest son, as well. She looked down at her hands. What was she going to do? She was alone now, all alone. It would probably be easier to end her own life now, and deny her eldest son the satisfaction of ending her life personally. Just the thought was heart-wrenchingly unbelievable. If someone told her that he was planning to do what he did, then she would have simply laughed. That was the extent of her shattered faith in her eldest son. What is she left to live for? What was left? Mom? Her head snapped up, falling to the form at the doorway to her room, eyes widening slightly in recognition when she saw the black hair, the onyx eyes, and the pure untainted relief on his small face to see her alive. Makoto's eyes widened in surprise, but also hope. Hope that what she was seeing before her was not an illusion of her mind. Hope that this was Sasuke who stood before her. Sasuke, she managed through a choked sob, and her youngest son ran into her arms, and hugged her tight, he himself crying, as he leaned into her, as if to make sure she was really there. "You're alive, Mom, you're really alive," he cried, as he buried his face into her chest, and cried with all his might, all pride to become a splendid ninja forgotten, and replaced with all the fear of a young child who thought he had lost everything. When that kid said so, I thought he was lying. "That kid?" she asked. Naruto from my class," Sasuke clarified. "He told me that you were still alive, but I didn't believe him. Then he hit me for calling him a liar, then he led her here." Makoto sighed, but continued to hold her crying son in her arms. She would continue to live, continue to strive, all for his sake. She would protect her son, and make sure he traveled the right path, and when the time came to revive their clan, she would make sure he did it right, without any of their clan's false or sense of superiority to get in the way. "The boy who helped you get here?" she asked at last, gently pushing her son back so she could look into his eyes. "Do you know where he is?" Sasuke was silent for a moment, actually attempting to think. Then he looked over to the door, and pointed. "He was right there, led me to where you were, Mom, and said he didn't want to get in the way." Makoto sighed after a moment. "Sounds like him alright, silly boy." She was completely unaware that tears were flowing down her cheeks. She wasn't aware she was crying until she saw the wet patches on her bed sheets, and it was only when she reached up to touch her soaked cheeks, before she finally cried. A mass of emotions, including the loss of her entire family, knowing that the culprit was her firstborn, and of seeing her own husband's body, brought all of her emotions to a simmering head. Sasuke was just able to look up, eyes whitening slightly upon seeing his mother, his pillar of strength in a family where his father barely acknowledged him, and where his older brother was becoming more aloof. To see her cry, as inconsolably as she was at this moment, was terrifying. "Mom?" Makoto sobbed loudly, as she hugged her youngest son close, needing nothing more than a little comfort through all the pain and guilt she was feeling at this moment. Her youngest returned her embrace, and she was unaware that he was also crying silently. Naruto dug his hands into his jacket pockets as he walked down the main street of the village, ignoring everything around him as he attempted to sort out his whirlwind of thoughts. He would never admit it, but what he had seen last night would probably leave a mark on him for as long as he remained among the living. He would probably never forget what he had seen. The masses of bodies, the rivers of blood, the continuous stream of terror-stricken, unmoving faces, each carrying their host's last painful memories of death, forever etched. An entire clan, perhaps one of the strongest clans in existence, completely eradicated overnight. Just the thought of it was terrifying. He may be young, and he may not be the smartest tool in the shed, but even he knew that the Uchiha clan were considered among the strongest and most well-respected in the village. "Help me, please." That girl's face, grimacing in pain and disbelief, would probably stay with him for a long time, as well. He didn't know why he did what he did, and he couldn't even begin to explain what it was that he did. All he knew was at that moment only a single thought flowed through his mind. That thought was simple, and to the point. He had to save her. He wanted to save her. There was more to her eyes than pain and fear, there was also betrayal, and he felt that for such betrayal to linger in her eyes, she must have known her attacker. Then there was his auntie. He wanted to press forward after the Anbu came, and began tending to the girl, but he was stopped by those very same Anbu. They had taken them both to the hospital, rushing the girl away from him, and staying guard over him in a hospital room, while a disgruntled doctor looked over him to make sure he was alright. He always hated hospitals, grew nauseous from the smell, and was nervous by the doctors. Some were nice, but twice as many others were cruel and uncaring. He hated the hospital. So he decided to leave, waiting for the moment when the eyes of his guards were diverted before sneaking out of the room. He knew that they were not that easy to lose, but he liked to think to himself that he was able to outsmart his protectors. That was when he met Sasuke in the corridor. He didn't seem hurt, at least not too badly, but the look in his eyes was another thing entirely. He seemed to be broken, and sure he was the only survivor of what had happened. Naruto decided to prove him wrong, and dragged him through the corridors. Sasuke looked ready to say something, but he shut up pretty quickly when he heard what Naruto had heard, that a few nurses mentioned that only a handful of Uchiha had survived the massacre. A handful. It made him shut up, but Naruto could see that it also brought him hope. Eventually they found the room he had been looking for, and Aunt Makoto was sitting upright in her bed, looking as lost and afraid as Sasuke was. Naruto let Sasuke wander in without any trouble, and turned around to walk down the corridor towards the exit. He felt he was not needed at the moment, and he had a real strong urge to escape the hospital. He looked up, blinking in surprise and bewilderment when he saw the familiar tree in the center of the academy grounds. That same swing tied to its strongest branch rocking slightly in the breeze. Naruto moved without realizing it, closing the distance between him and the swing, closing the gap within seconds he saw on the worn wood, feeling the creak as it took his weight. For the longest time he sat there, looking out over the seemingly deserted terrain of the academy. Class must be out today, it was too quiet. Naruto was unaware as to how long he sat on the swing, but the next time he looked up one of them was there, a member of his Jiji's Anbu Black Ops, looking down at him with his emotionless white animal mask. It was an owl this time. "Come on, kiddo, Hokage-sama was looking for you." Their skulls were definitely getting rusty. She had just barely woken up, still drowsy. It wasn't until she sat up and wiped the sleep from her eyes that she noticed that she and her son weren't the only ones in the room. The kunai hidden in the sleeve of her sleeping kimono was in her hand in a backward grip and at the ready. At that moment she was not a grieving widow or a protective mother. At that moment she was a kunoichi ready for a fight. She hesitated when she saw the face of the intruder, and after a moment she lowered her weapon and placed it on the bedside table across from her, lowering her head in apology. Hokage-sama. The old man wasn't wearing his robes or hat of state, trading them in for a simple hakama and pants of his own clan. His saver smoking pipe was in his mouth though, and the tobacco was burning away as he smoked, breathing out a waft of it from the corner of his mouth into the air as he set the spent match down. "It's quite alright, Mikoto-sen," he acknowledged before giving her a sad smile. "You wish to hear what news we have on your clan and the fate of the perpetrator?" She hesitated a moment before finally nodding her head. "Yes, Hokage-sama. Besides you and Sasuke, there is another survivor of the clan. Your niece Midori is out of surgery, and although she isn't out of the woods yet, she is stable," Sarutobi said, as he took his pipe from his mouth and blew out the smoke. "As for the fate of Itachi, he was able to escape, took the lives of a few of my Anbu, and injured quite a few others in his escape. For now the chances of him returning to finish what he started are not unlikely, so I've strengthened your guard to Tails, and that of your son and niece, until we're sure he's gone." Makoto did not answer for the longest time, attention drawn to that of her youngest son, sleeping beside her in an uneasy rest. She caressed his messy black hair, smiling softly as he stirred, but did not awake. "Thank you for telling me personally, Hokage-sama." The Hokage nodded his head, clutching his pipe back within his mouth as he leaned back against his chair. "A manhunt has been organized to try and track Itachi down. If he is within the country we will find him, however it is more likely he has left the country altogether. If that is the case, then we will have to count on our allies for help, but chances are he has fled further to unfriendly territory. So the chances of catching him are nil?" Makoto asked, as she continued to caress her youngest son's hair. The Hokage nodded his head solemnly. "We're preparing funerals for all of your clan. I understand it may be difficult for you to bear, so I would recommend not returning to live in the clan compounds. A flatter house can be set up for you, Sasuke, and Midori when she fully recovers if you wish." "Thank you, Hokage-sama," she replied, thinking for a moment before looking over. "And yes, I think it would be best to move out of that compound. I don't think it would be healthy for any of us to stay in that compound with the memories and the ghosts." "Good, then I will leave you to rest," Sarutobi nodded, as he stood up, picking up his office hat, as he walked towards the door. The door closed, leaving her alone with her son. The Uchiha matriarch, probably one of only 3 left alive in the world, lay down on her bed, hugged her son tight, and allowed her exhaustion to consume her once again. Midori lay in bed, unmoving, looking up at the white surface of the ceiling with dull onyx eyes. She sighed, but otherwise made no other motion. How she hated hospitals. The smell of disinfectant was nauseating, and the lack of life or color in the rooms seemed to suck all of the joy out of the atmosphere. Yes, she hated hospitals with a passion. Give her worn wooden floors and paper sliding doors any day. She stifled a harsh exhale of breath when the stab wound in her stomach throbbed painfully. The wound had been sewed shut. Her organs had been healed through medical jutsu, salve applied, and bandages wrapped around her stab wound. She had been given anesthetic to dull the pain, but it still seemed to remain as sharp as when she had been stabbed, and as painful as when she was lying in her own blood on the main road of the compound. She did not move. She could not move. The pain immobilized her, unable to move and unable to cry out. She simply gripped the bed sheets until her knuckles went white, gritting her teeth and shutting her eyes hard, emitting nothing more than a pained whimper, as she rode out the new wave of agony assailing her. Images haunted her, and would continue to haunt her until her dying breath. She had run out of the house, hearing the screams and the sounds of battle, drawing her mother's cherished katana, and rushing out to defend her home, defend her clan. She hadn't stopped until she stood in the center of the street, looking at the fallen forms of her loved ones with wide, disbelieving eyes. Movement caught the edges of her vision, and she spun around, hair flailing to see who was directly behind her. When she saw him, her grip on her katana loosened, and she lowered her weapon in obvious relief. "Itachi, don't scare me like that." He did not answer, simply continued to look at her with dull eyes. It was kind of intimidating. She was probably the closest thing to a friend he had. The two of them had grown up together, used to play together before his training really started. How stupid she was. She was so relieved to see him that she just didn't notice the blood sprayed across his cheek, nor the dyed crimson blade of his ninjutsu. She didn't notice until his blade was held deep in her gut. The first thing that hit Midori was shock, pure disbelieving shock, followed by terror, and then, as she fell on her side, Itachi pulled the blade callus from her body. As she hit the ground, she felt betrayal. She had liked to think that she and Itachi were friends, but he obviously didn't think the same way, not if those emotionless orbs of his were any indication. He looked down at her, as if she were nothing, less than nothing. Then he walked away. "Damn him. Damn you, Itachi," she murmured in a broken voice, knowing that tears were streaming down her cheeks, but didn't care. "Damn you." Their memories since then were hazy, but she remembered blurred images of her little cousin, Itachi's brother, Sasuke, and a blonde-haired boy roughly his age. The boy stayed with her. He did something to her. Midori didn't know what he did, but whatever it was, it saved her life. She owed him, whoever he was, and she was sure, as hell she was going to repay it. She dully heard the door of her room open, and turned her head to see the familiar form of her aunt. Mikoto stood in the frame, pale slender hand gripping onto an IV drip. She looked pale, and by her bandages she had suffered at the hands of Itachi as well, but she was still alive. Midori thought it was a cruel mirage at first, her mind, dimmed by drugs, playing tricks on her. She still hoped though, hoped with all of her might that she was not the victim of a cruel trick of the mind, Auntie. The Uchiha matriarch smiled softly as she entered the room, hand pulling the pole along with her, but showing no outward signs of pain. She was dressed in a simple white hospital kimono, one designed to be baggy and not cling to the skin. Mikoto sat down on the chair beside her niece's bedside, looked over, and smiled. "You're alive, Midori," she said softly. "Thank whatever gods there are for small mercies. You're here, right?" Midori asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're not some cruel trick, right? How could she break down like this? She was a shinobi of the Uchiha clan. She should be able to control her emotions better than this." Midori thought this, as she forced her eyes shut tightly to stop the flow of tears which threatened to spill. The gentle hand caressed her cheek, and the young girl opened her eyes to see the pained, saddened, yet loving eyes of her aunt, looking down upon her with a sad smile. "I'm here, Midori, you're not alone." Those words broke what little fortitude the young Uchiha had left. She cried, "Thanks for watching my video. See you next time, till then sayonara."